Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Way the World Works. So we have been talking a lot about the build-up to the Constitution, and we did that by talking about the Articles of Confederation and why people didn't like them, why they thought they were flawed. And so we're leading up to this constitutional convention that's going to give us something that's pretty similar to the one we have today, minus, some amendments here and there. So I'm going to continue telling that story and leading up to that. And the reason we're doing this is because Constitution Day is actually on September 17th. So it's coming up. So I want to be able to give you guys something to talk about as we celebrate the Constitution's birthday. So today we're going to talk about one of the final nails in the coffin of the Articles of Confederation. And if you remember what we talked about, I said that a lot of people wanted a stronger central government, but then there were a lot of other people who thought the Articles of Confederation were good because it didn't have that strong central government. The problem was there was issues collecting taxes, which again, whether that's a feature or a bug is up for debate. Congress was a thing under the Articles of Confederation, or a form of a governing body, but they didn't have any power or any enforcing capability. So it wasn't doing a whole lot. Now, obviously, you're going to have a lot of people like Mercy Otis Warren, who we're going to talk about in another episode, who's a amazing historian, female historian at the time, which not a lot of women were writing books, and I think she wrote some plays and some satire, but she's going to come out very against the Constitution for this very reason. We're coming off, I say we as if I was alive. I'm old, I'm not that old. They were coming off a period of time where they were living under extreme tyranny, so they understood what the revolution was fought for, and then someone to come in and say, let's have another central government, you have to understand why they would be so suspicious of this or so cautious of this happening. So right now we've talked about the Articles a couple episodes ago. Now we're going to talk about an event that happened in between the Articles happening, people realizing this isn't great, and then the Constitutional Convention beginning. So Constitutional Convention at this time is in the works. It's going to happen. And then this event is going to be kind of a reinforcing idea of, oh my goodness, we need something new. And this event is called Shays Rebellion. So Shays Rebellion, which we're going to talk about today, is one of those moments where I feel like the ideals of the revolution were really put to a test. It's really easy to espouse, meaning to hold and to talk about these big ideas when they're just ideas. They're hypothetical, but they're not real. And so now you're going to have these constitutional, or I guess there's no constitution yet, but these revolutionary ideas, the ideals that created the Constitution, that formed the foundation of our country. You're going to have these really put to the test. And I think you're going to be a little bit surprised of what some of our most radical founding fathers, how they switched their opinion on this. So Shays Rebellion, this happens in August 1786 to like January or February in 1787. So it goes on for a while. And it's called Shays Rebellion because it was started by a man named Daniel Shays. Now, Daniel Shays was a farmer, and he also served in the Revolutionary War. So he is a veteran. He was on the front lines. He fought to make America America. So he comes back, and he is not getting paid. This happened to a lot of soldiers when they came back from the Revolutionary War because one, we were in debt from the war, and each state was having to fund certain things themselves because remember, this is a loose confederation of states, not a union yet. So Daniel Shays comes back, and like many people fighting the war, does not get paid for all that time he was serving and risked his life. But worse than that, he came back to all these notices and these tax bills saying, you haven't paid your taxes on your farm. We're actually going to take your farm unless you pay all these bills. Imagine that, okay? Imagine fighting for your brand new country, coming back, and that's how you're treated. So Daniel Shays was obviously pretty angry, but he was not alone in this. This was happening to a lot of farmers. And a lot of farmers were actually getting their property taken away. And again, not being compensated for fighting a war, for risking their lives. So he's pretty upset. And I don't know about you, but I would be pretty upset too if that happened to me. So he decides he's had enough. He gets a little, I don't want to call it an army because it's not. He gets some rebels together, and they start going to the courthouses in Massachusetts and shutting down the courthouses. And the reason they went to the courthouses, and also like debtors' prisons and stuff, but the reason they focused on the courthouses is because that is where farmers' land was being officially taken away. That's where they were saying, you can't pay your bills, we're taking it away. And so they were stopping that from happening. That was the rationale of going to the courthouses, to stop it from happening there. This is not a good financial time for America, who is brand new. It's trying to pay off these debts. The states have their own debt because, again, like I said, the states were paying for war. There's no mechanism under the Articles of Confederation for any sort of central government to collect taxes. Britain's upset. They don't want to trade with us. So you're also missing out on that stuff. And then you have very wealthy merchants who are demanding hard currency, meaning like gold, like you've got these like precious metals. They want hard currency from these farmers for taxes or for, loans or whatever it was they took out. There was a mixture of both. And the farmers can't pay them. They weren't getting paid by their own new country they just served. So there was a lot of just horrible things happening. And remember, the founding fathers are watching this. So Shays Rebellion is going on. It goes on, like I said, for a fairly long time, almost half a year. But you have Founding Farmers. That's a restaurant in DC, by the way, Founding Farmers, and I go to it all the time, and it is delicious. So I mixed the words. But so these farmers are angry, and here's the point that really gets me. So Sam Adams, remember, Sam Adams is our guy who was like a rebel. He was a son of liberty. He was all about the Tea Party. He was all about, protesting in the streets and making a stand. Well, okay, things have changed a little bit for good old Sam, because now Sam is saying, we need to squash this rebellion. Now he's saying, oh my goodness, you know what? This is unthinkable. Let's take away their right to a trial. They don't even get a right to a trial. How dare they? And you know what? Let's give them the death penalty. And I'm just thinking, can you believe this? Here was the man that was so outspoken, who was such a rebel, he made his cousin John Adams look like a saint in certain lights. And now he's saying, oh my goodness, let's kill our own countrymen because they rebelled. And what's really interesting about this is let's talk about why we rebelled, right? Thomas Jefferson got this idea from John Locke. I mean, a lot of the founders also agreed with this, Thomas Paine as well. But John Locke, this British philosopher they loved, he was a big proponent that when governments, turn to absolute tyranny, when governments are oppressing you so badly, when they're taxing you without representation, when they are squashing your rights, when they're taking your property like these farmers, well, then you have the right to a rebellion. It's your duty almost to rebel. And so you have this spirit of the revolution that would have been more in favor for Shays Rebellion, but for some reason, now things are different. And I think that brings something really interesting to mind. And that is that, remember, like I said in the beginning, when there are these ideals that are hypothetical, that are in your mind, it's like, oh, that's so easy. Sure, let's do that. But then when they're put into practice, they're a lot harder. And you'll notice, and this happens a lot, this happened when John Adams was president as well, where he kind of went back and forth on some things he used to believe in, and then it got harder when he was in power, right? Because think about it, when you're in power, even though you had these ideals, there's this sense of like, well, I need the people to fall in line because it's really hard to govern individuals, which is kind of the point. That's why we have this belief in individualism. It should be hard. It should be hard to govern individuals. So it's a really interesting turn, and you're going to see the founding fathers really split on this. And in fact, so at this time, they'll have a falling out later, but at this time, John and Abigail Adams are very close friends with Thomas Jefferson. And this was an issue that they split on as well, because the Adams also, that John and Abigail, not Sam, but also thought like this was inappropriate. I think Abigail actually said something to the extent of like, oh, these farmers are just whining. But one thing to keep in mind, even though Abigail and John are two of my favorite figures in founding father and founding mother territory, they're not spending this time period in America. Let's think about this. So John Adams was in France for a little bit. He was in England for a little bit. I believe he was in Holland for a little bit. They're not in America during this, so they're not seeing it firsthand. Neither is Jefferson. But Jefferson, our good old rebel, he's got a little bit of a differing view. So I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get it right. So Thomas Jefferson finds out about this, and he writes a letter to his friend William Stephen Smith, okay? And he says this: God forbid we should ever be 20 years without a rebellion. The people cannot be always well informed. The part which is wrong will be discontented in proportion to the importance of the facts they misconceive. If they remain quiet under such misconceptions, it is lethargy, the forerunner of death to the public liberty. And here's where it gets real good. And what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms, the remedy to set them right as to facts, pardon and pacify them. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is a natural manure. And then later on in another letter, but same time, same topic, he says, a little rebellion now and then is a good thing and necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. So Jefferson is taking a very Jeffersonian stance here. He's saying, no, we need to remind our leaders who's in charge. It is we the people. It is not them. We need to remind them. And sometimes that takes a little bit of aggression. That takes taking up arms when things get out of hand, when they are taking too much power. And I want to point out this. This is one of my favorite quotes. I love a good, strongly worded Jefferson quote. But let's keep this in mind. Jefferson is not the one on the front lines, right? So Jefferson didn't serve in the war. Jefferson's not the one who's putting his life in immediate physical risk. That being said, just signing the Declaration at all and being a part of that made him, liable to or subject to get killed by the king when we were under British rule, because that was an act of treason. So he did risk his life. Having said that, he is not the one who's going to be providing this natural manure, as he calls it. So it's a little easier said than done when it comes to Jefferson talking about that. So all this is going on. This is a very, very contentious time. And like I said, it's also really important because it's putting the country's ideals on trial. It's saying, okay, you wanted to do this great American experiment, colonists. Can you do it? Can you take these ideals and make them a real life thing? And we kind of failed here. Now, like I said, the Constitutional Convention, which was originally only supposed to be a revision of the Articles, but then ended up being a whole rewrite, that is already in the works. They realize there's some problems with the Articles of Confederation. They know this, but then Shays' Rebellion is just reinforcing this idea that, this isn't great. And it's scary to a lot of colonists who, one, just sacrificed husbands and sons and money and everything to fight this war of independence against a central government. And now you have people saying, well, we need a stronger central government. Maybe we need a little bit. Maybe we need just a little bit of central government. But as we know, it's hard to have just a little bit of a central government. When you get that big apparatus in the middle who's making all the rules for everybody, things can get out of hand really quickly, and they usually do. So this is a big moment for America, and didn't end so well for Shays and for his little group of farmers who were also angry. So Daniel Shays is arrested in the end. Now, he was pardoned later on, so it kind of worked out for him, but they did end up hanging some of the angry farmers and ex-soldiers who were involved. And this is wild to me. It's very wild to me because you think these men just fought for your freedom. They were the ones on the front lines. They were the ones, losing limbs or motor function because they were, wounded in war, who were in many cases walking barefoot in the snow for some of the soldiers who that's just so cold, but who, made it back alive. So we kind of failed that test, I think, but it did show the flaws of the Articles. And like I said, I tend to go both ways on this, where I think the Articles of Confederation were really good. I think they were a great start. Sometimes I think it got some parts better than the Constitution did, but overall, I think the Constitution is an amazing document. I think it has done more for world history in trying to restrain government And I'm thankful for it. It's not perfect. Obviously, it is not perfect. The Articles of Confederation weren't perfect either. But Shays' Rebellion is really going to show that. And it's going to divide the founders who were at one point all pretty aligned. So I will wrap it up here in a minute, but I want to ask you guys, whose team would you be on? Would you be Team Jefferson? Would you be Team Sam Adams in this? Would you think this is too much, we shouldn't have this rebellion, we need to squash it? Or would you be like Jefferson, where you're like, no, we need to show them who's boss every now and then? It's kind of a hard question. I mean, I know what mine would be. Jefferson. All the way. I'm a Jeffersonian. What can I say? If you want to find out more about this period of time, which is really good, highly recommend A Tuttle Twins, a series of stories of American history. This one is, of course, 1776 to 1791, because that's going to be after the Declaration is signed and what happened in the aftermath. Great book. Please check it out. There's 2 parts, though. There's also 1215 to 1776, which is another great piece of history. It's all good. But we will wrap it up there. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share with friends. And until next time, we will talk to you later.